Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us here at AJP Action for our annual Palestine Advocacy Days. My name is Muhammad Habba. I am the Director of Development here at AJP Action, and I am privileged and honored to be here with you all today. As a activist and advocate myself, I was one of the few who joined in the first advocacy day. It was about a group of 10 to 15 of us, and I may have been the youngest there. But it grew in me something that sticks in me till this day, the ability to go out and advocate and work for justice in Palestine. And today's session talks a bit about some of the ideas that we aim to not only implant and encourage our attendees and our participants in, but the change that we've been seeing since we first started doing these advocacy days. At AJP Action, we have seen the turning tides. We have been there for the breaking of the dam. And we are here now in one of the most crucial moments ever, in a time where Palestine is more important than ever in not only US public opinion, but in politics here in the US. No one would have thought less than 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago, that Palestine would be so important in our present day politics. No one would have thought that presidents would be asked about it, and congressional representatives and senators would be asked about the things that they're asked about these days. No one would have thought the national public support would be here the way it is. And through the work that AJP Action, AMP, and other organizations and allies have been doing for years now, we have seen this change. And that's why I'm glad to be joined by so many wonderful panelists and so many wonderful so many wonderful panelists and some actual leaders out here in this country. Joining me today is our executive director, Dr. Osama Abuirshaid, the executive director of AJP Action and American Muslims for Palestine. Dr. Osama is a political analyst and commentator and has authored numerous studies. And to start us off, Dr. Osama, we wanted to talk firstly about your opening remarks in VPAD. We talked about how much public opinion has shifted in favor of Palestinians among young people. Do you think that AIPAC and organizations like AIPAC will continue to be an intimidating force in the foreseeable future, or are we on the cusp of a generational shift that could make AIPAC and organizations like AIPAC irrelevant?
Well, thank you, Muhammad. This is not a question that we can provide a simple, straightforward answer to. However, I think it will be correct to say that the outsized influence AIPAC and its likes hold is facing an uncertain future. There are several reasons why I'm saying this. One, AIPAC and other Zionist organizations, mainly right-wing organizations, in the past 4 or 5 years have been identifying with the right wing in the United States. It adopts and adheres to a more of a Likudish ideology from the Likud party, a right-wing ideology that does not sit very well even with the broader Jewish American community today. Most Jewish Americans tend to be liberal or identify as liberals. They tend to support progressive agendas. That's not to say that they support a reasonable solution in occupied Palestine, but in general, they do support more progressive policies, and there's to some degree are more critical of Israel than AIPAC and other right-wing Zionist organizations. So APAC is losing traction even within its own, within the community that it claims to represent, mainly within the youth, the younger Jewish generations who identify more as liberals, identify more as progressives, who are more critical of Israel according to reliable public opinion polls. To the point where the former Israeli ambassador to Washington, Don Dramer, argued that it is time for Israel and for other Zionist organizations in the U.S. to abandon the illusion that it can win back the American Jewish youth, and he argued for spending more efforts with the evangelical community, although on a different level of analysis, even within the evangelical community in the United States, Israel is losing within the younger generation. So it is a generational issue. Whether Israel like it or not, it is a generational issue, and Israel is facing an uncertain future in the U.S. as well as the Zionist organizations here. So there are, as I said, several factors. I've spoke about two factors. I will add another factor. Because of APAC support for a certain ideology, a certain loyalty to Israel, it has created a rift within the Jewish community, a rift that was exemplified in the case of Representative Andy Levin in Michigan's 10th congressional district. Andy Levin is a descendant of a prominent Jewish political dynasty. He was supported by J Street, a liberal Jewish Zionist organization. He was supported by progressives. He's someone who identifies as Zionist, someone who does not shy away from stating his support for Israel, someone who was a former synagogue president, someone who is not against Israel, but he sees that the future of Israel, to have a secure and democratic Israel, it has to accept the fact that it does practice illegal occupation and it does oppress the Palestinian people. And for the sake of Israel, not only the Palestinians, it needs to find a solution, a just solution, a two-state solution, whether we agree or disagree with the formula, but that's what he advocates for. So he does not advocate against Israel. He advocates, in fact, for Israel's security and Israel's nature, the claimed nature as a democratic state. So this man was defeated recently because of the tens of millions of dollars collected and used against him in his district by APAC and its super PACs and other Zionist organizations, super PACs, to defeat him. APAC alone, or one of the APAC super PACs, spent $26 million to defeat this man and to defeat this politician, someone who no one ever thought that he will be defeated in his own district. So this created a rift within the Jewish community where J Street and other liberal Zionist organizations accused APAC of narrowing the definition of being an Israeli loyalist or being an Israeli supporter. Because now, if you criticize Israel for any sort of policy, for any reason, now you become an enemy of Israel and become an enemy within the Zionist movement. This did not sit very well within the Jewish community, and this did not sit well within Democrats, because many Democrats now are accusing APAC and its likes of bullying its way through, of bullying candidates, of using dark money to defeat progressive candidates. So for all of these reasons, I'll tell you that APAC does face an uncertain future because it's losing relevance, it's losing connection, it's becoming more of a hawkish organization, more of a right-wing organization, an organization that can be defined and to some degree identical with Donald Trump and his agenda, the agenda of hate, the agenda of intolerance. While the Jewish community does stand for tolerance, because at the end of the day, they represent a minority in this country. And if you are a minority, you don't want to create any atmosphere or allow any atmosphere of intolerance to take place. So APAC is losing, in this sense, APAC is losing, and other Zionist, right-wing Zionist organizations are losing some relevance. It doesn't mean that this relevance will fade away if there is no organized work that exposes APAC for what it is, exposes how they are how they're detrimental to peace and to stability in the Middle East, and how they're detrimental to tolerance in the United States, because they are advancing an ideology that again speaks against all of minorities' rights, and takes a stand in the hate camp that was exemplified by Donald Trump and still being exemplified by him and his camp. So it is again not a very easy question to answer, but I would say that public opinion polls now polls do suggest that Israel is losing traction, that APAC is being marginalized in terms of the public opinion polls, mainly within the Democratic Party, mainly within the younger generations, the Gen Z's generation. It is losing traction. And this is something that we need to continue to expose. We need to continue to outline. We need to continue to organize and to advocate, and to continue with our awareness campaigns to show how APAC is not on the side of justice, not on the side of liberty, not on the side of equality for all. And it's not even good for Israel and the future of Israel. Now, I'm not advocating the future of Israel or what is in the best interest of an apartheid state, but it represents a bad lawyer for a bad actor. And this formula, I don't think it's in the best interest of apartheid and its advocates and apologists in the United States.
Thank you, Dr. Osama. Moving forward, some of our additional panelists to hopefully get through this conversation. I'd like to introduce you all one by one, so that we could continue this conversation and build off of this. In addition to Dr. Osama, we have with us as well Huwaida Arraf. Huwaida is a mother, a human rights advocate, and an attorney. Huwaida is a founder of the International Solidarity Movement, and she is recently ran as a candidate for Michigan's 10th congressional district. In addition to Huwaida, we are also joined by Eva. Eva is a leader in If Not Now. If Not Now is a movement of young American Jews working for freedom and dignity for Palestinians and Israelis. And last but not least, Omar Baddar. Omar is a Palestinian American political analyst, a digital producer, and a human rights advocate based in Washington, D.C. He's been a co-host and producer with Al Jazeera, and served as the executive director of the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee of Massachusetts. Thank you all for joining us. As we heard from Dr. Osama, and building off of this, I wanted to go straight to Huwaida. Huwaida, you were recently a candidate for Congress. And I'm sure it was an exciting experience, and it's something that Palestinians and supporters of Palestinian rights around the country were paying attention to. A lot of Palestinians find the prospect of running for office a bit intimidating, particularly because they anticipate attacks from defenders of Israeli apartheid. And these attacks are obviously rooted in anti-Palestinian racism. Do you have any advice, Huwaida, for those who are considering running on how to prepare for things like that, for those types of attacks?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. Thank you to AJP Action for putting on another great and important conference. Part of what we do here, the advocacy work that we do here, goes a long way towards getting us closer to where we want to get, which is liberation for Palestine and respect for human rights. And when we're talking about what we are doing here, it is kind of political advocacy, which I have been doing for a long time through my work on the ground with the International Solidarity Movement in Palestine. Part of that is doing the actions on the ground, and then encouraging, motivating, and engaging in lobbying our members of Congress to get them information, to get them to vote in a certain way. And then I became a human rights attorney and tried to use the law also to advocate. And when I decided to run for Congress, it's kind of taking that next step, right? Because we are, in a sense, advocating, and we need better laws, domestic laws, and when we talk about also our international relations, better laws there that respect and that center people's human rights. And all of the years that I had done advocating and lobbying, it kind of made sense to take the next step and actually run myself for office. And one of the things that I'd wanted to do with my candidacy, obviously win so that I could have a voice inside to pushing for these better laws and better represent the people and what we stand for, but also to a lot of Palestinians and to people who do work in advocating for Palestinian rights, because for so long and continuing and being exacerbated even or intensified is this attempt to intimidate activists or defenders of Palestinian human rights with all of the doxing that's been happening. And we heard earlier, if you were part of, or if you tuned into the first panel, also talking about what happened also in the workspace for somebody that speaks out for Palestinian rights is all intended to intimidate us into silence. And I had wanted, among other things, my campaign to be an example for people that do advocate for Palestinian rights, not to be afraid to do so, not to be intimidated into silence. And it's not easy. For sure, it's not easy because we have a lot of haters. We have a lot of apologists for the state of Israel that want to label everything that we say in support of Palestinian rights as being anti-Semitic. And that does intimidate people. And I think the way to get past that, to overcome that, is with our own kind of solidarity. And it's by kind of increasing our work and raising our voices. So one of the things that I said, even my campaign manager in the beginning, he said to me, okay, the first thing you want to do is to scrub your social media. And I said, look, there is nothing that I have said or done before that is in the public space that I need to change. I am not going to try to dance around because on social media, mainly I have spoken up against human rights abuses. And I'm not going to try to candy coat anything that I've said or done. Israel is committing the crime of apartheid. We need to say that loud and clear. Israel is committing the crime of apartheid. Now, I did get attacked. For the most part, I ignored it. It was by mainly extremists and people that have been attacking Palestinian rights activists for years, and me specifically for the past 2 decades. So I ignored it and focused more on getting out my message, which tried to combine the issues that my district cares about, which, to be honest, is not Palestine. It is the everyday kitchen table type issues, but also work in my past work for human rights, because the human rights of Palestinians or anybody all over the world, we are all connected in that we are human beings and deserve the chance and we have a right to live with freedom, dignity, opportunity. And that is something we believe in. And the same passion that I fought for Palestinian rights is the same passion that I'm going to fight for the right for my neighbor here to be able to heat their home or put food on the table or have medical care when they need it. And our tax dollars don't need to be going to Israel to commit these human rights abuses, which is exactly what our other politicians have been doing for decades, is sending billions of our tax dollars to underwrite a brutal colonial apartheid regime, instead of focusing it on supporting our communities and really standing up for human rights like we say we do. So instead of shying away or trying to, in any way manipulate what I've said or things that I've done, I worked it into my campaigning, the very reason that I was running for office. And I know I've taken a long time, so let me just end by telling you, we took a poll. Now, obviously, I did not win my primary, but I did not win my primary not because of Palestine. One of the person who won has been in Macomb, my area, politics for 50 years. He just had very high name recognition that was very difficult to overcome without a lot of money. Unfortunately, running for office in this country takes a lot of money. But we ran a poll, and we knew that my, name recognition was kind of low. So just in the beginning, when people heard my name, not many people said they'd vote for me. But then when we talked about my platform and other issues, my favorability rating spiked. And then we went through the positives and the negatives of each candidate for office, including the person who won, who had very high name recognition. And my negatives, I highlighted things, or the people that were taking the poll, like she's a terrorist supporter, she's an anti-Semite. The worst things that people have said about Palestinian advocates, we used it and we told the voter, this is what people say about her. What do you think? And then we told them what my response would be. And at the very end of the poll, I ended up beating the front runner, the guy who actually won, by 11 points. The attacks against me, calling me a terrorist, calling me an anti-Semite, when the voter heard my response to it, largely believed my response, and it did not hurt me in the polls. And we also asked the voter, we posed a question to them. We said, Huwaida would likely advocate for ending aid to Israel because, and it went on explaining why. Is this a very strong reason to vote for her, a strong reason to vote for her, or not a strong reason to vote for her at all? Overwhelmingly, 68% said it was a very strong or a strong reason to vote for me. And that is the culmination of all the work that we've been doing. So yes, you will probably get attacked, but you also have this community and much more that we have been building over the years and decades that will come and that will support you. So let's just raise our voices. You can certainly contact me and many others, and you will have the support to run for office, and we need to be in that space a lot more. Thank you.
Thank you, Huwaida. And just to reiterate and agree with you, we in the Palestine movement do have mad haters. Ava, moving on to you, this current election cycle, we have seen some disappointing losses. As Huwaida mentioned, Huwaida was one of the candidates who unfortunately wasn't able to win. And some candidates had more of an investment, and we've seen this around the country by groups like AIPAC and other Zionist lobby groups, where they invested heavily in against these candidates. And we saw this in North Carolina, we saw this in Pennsylvania, and we saw it namely in Michigan with Congressman Andy Levin. Obviously, the defeat of anyone who wants accountability for Israel is a setback for the movement of Palestinian rights. But given Levin's prominence in the American Jewish community, do you think that his loss changes the conversation there in any particular way?
Yeah, thanks for that question, and thank you so much for having me. I think the short answer is yes, at least it should, and the question is to what extent. And I think to answer this, we have to talk a little bit about why people in the Jewish community support AIPAC, or at least why people don't oppose it vocally, or at least not yet. And a lot of people who are donating to AIPAC or supporting it are doing that out of a place of existential threat. They feel like AIPAC and other lobby groups who are focused on defeating candidates who threaten the current unconditional military funding to Israel, they're focused on those candidates because on some level they genuinely believe that that unconditional military funding is what is going to keep Jews safe. And then of course that's also combined with deep anti-Palestinian racism, and we can't erase that part. And there's a whole other group of people, much more numerous, who are either war hawks or white Christian Zionists who are supportive of this unconditional US military funding to Israel for other reasons, two other reasons, either to, number one, advance US imperial interests in the region using Israel as a sort of proxy state, or two, because they believe in an end times prophecy that typically does not end well for the Jewish people. And so AIPAC is kind of in a bind, and we have really seen this cycle, the sort of natural extreme consequences of that. where because their philosophy is safety through securing unconditional military funding at all costs, the most extreme conclusion of that worldview is their endorsement this cycle of 109 insurrectionist Republicans who voted to overturn the results of the 2020 election. Those are the kinds of people who believe in this unconditional funding for the other two reasons, either for US imperial interests or because of a Christian Zionist end times prophecy, and sometimes both. And those people are implicitly or explicitly affiliated with the very same movements posing the biggest actual threats to American Jews. So that endorsement, I think, was a wake-up call for a lot of people. And then at the same time, again, as Dr. Osama mentioned, as Mohammed just mentioned, this cycle, AIPAC poured millions of dollars against Andy Levin, who is a former synagogue president. He started this entire Jewish social justice ecosystem in Detroit. In a lot of ways, he's coming from the center of the American Jewish community. And we saw AIPAC absolutely try to destroy him because he's demanding basic accountability in the US-Israel relationship. And they have been extremely clear that part of why they're doing that is because Andy Levin is Jewish, and he was called the most corrosive member of Congress to the US-Israel relationship, because he undermines the playbook that AIPAC and people who are advocating for unconditional US support have relied on for decades, which is to smear as anti-Semitic anyone who demands accountability in that relationship or is asking for securing Palestinian human rights. And so these two things, the endorsement of the insurrectionists and the defeat of Andy Levin, yes, should be a huge wake-up call to American Jews who are supportive of AIPAC, who are donating to AIPAC, or who aren't currently against AIPAC. And we have seen that conversation start to happen where people are honestly really taken aback by the extremes to which we really saw AIPAC go this cycle. And the hope and the question is like, is this going to help make people look at the underlying philosophy that safety for Jews means unconditional support for Israel, and that securing Jewish safety means literally destroying any semblance of Palestinian safety? And in the US, this philosophy is one that the majority of American Jews reject, that we can only secure our own safety by undermining the safety of other people. Dr. Osama talked about this as well. This is extremely clear in the Andy Levin example. He comes from that tradition. And AIPAC is undermining him, and they're aligning themselves with Republican fascist members of Congress because that's who else exposes that philosophy of safety for some at the expense of safety for others. And so, yes, many in the Jewish community are disturbed by that, and we're seeing that. The question is whether they're going to be able to get organized and reject AIPAC. And the stakes of that are very high, of whether the Jewish community can sort of unite enough to be able to reject AIPAC as representing a tiny minority and a tiny fraction of the community. Because there's a misconception that American Jews agree with AIPAC. And that part of what bolsters AIPAC is that misconception, which they actively cultivate. And AIPAC, the other thing is that AIPAC itself is not uniquely undemocratic. Even though what they're trying to do is what plenty of other actors in the US political system have done for decades, which is to undermine the will of the people by pouring lots of money into different races. And so AIPAC is just exploiting a vulnerability in our system that a ton of other lobbies and super PACs have exploited in the past. But it's really difficult to call that out in the same way that we call out other lobbies because of their cover around anti-Semitism. So it's really crucial that American Jews who are waking up to this reality in this moment get together and organize and call that out vocally, so that way the entire progressive movement can make very clear that just like other lobbies, fossil fuels, pharma, the NRA, other things that we reject, we can reject AIPAC as well.
Thank you, Ava. Moving on to Omar. Omar, given your research on the Israel lobby, how do their efforts to control the narrative today, with all the changes that we've been seeing in public discourse, contrast with their efforts in the past? I think your mic is not on.
Thank you, Mohammed. I should know better by now about the mute button, but sometimes it slips. Look, I think that in the past, the Israel lobby, the pro-Israel lobby, had pretty significant control over the narrative when it came to Palestine and Israel. And you saw that this is where they devoted much of their energy. There was heavy emphasis on the importance of messaging in public discourse, highlighting that Israel is a democracy and shared values with Americans, and this creating this sense that Israelis are like Americans and Palestinians are the other, otherizing Palestinians further. But if you look at everything that has transpired in recent years, I think that we can say that the Israel lobby has lost complete control of the narrative at this point. Part of this has been natural. It's the rise in extremism in Israeli politics has caused the mask to drop off. Israeli politicians no longer pretend to be striving for peace. They're quite open at this point about their desire to conquer all of the land, about the fact that they don't see Palestinians as equal human beings who are deserving of rights, and with their comfort with effectively permanent apartheid. That has been a huge part of it. And I think another part that cannot be dismissed is the extent to which advocacy in the United States has been relentless by Palestinians and their supporters to create an accurate picture for the American public about what is unfolding. And part of that is also undoubtedly the growing diversity, visible diversity within the American Jewish community when it comes to this issue, is that there was a time in which organizations like AIPAC could pretend to speak for the entire Jewish community. But then the emergence of progressive organizations like If Not Now and Jewish Voice for Peace, and even some centrist organizations like J Street, has busted that myth and made room for people to be simultaneously pro-Jewish and pro-Palestinian, emphasizing that these things are not in contradiction and that you can take a pro-justice approach without falling victim to the smear of anti-Semitism. But that nonetheless has not meant that the smear has gone away. If anything, we have now seen a shift in the Israel lobby's tactics, moving from emphasis on persuasion to a complete shift towards bullying and smears. The smears that Ava has talked about a little bit, and the ones that Huwaida has experienced directly as well, as she was talking about. They're at a point where they can get many members of Congress to fall in line, but they cannot crush dissent completely. And that, I think, is kind of the major shift that we ought to be focusing on. Because ultimately, it's about the fear barrier. It's about the fact that there was this aura of invincibility when it comes to talking about AIPAC and the power of the Israel lobby. Members of Congress, when they're surveyed, used to say nearly unanimously that, say that AIPAC is one of the most powerful lobbies in Congress, that they preferred not to cross. And then you had AIPAC itself bragging about its influence on Congress. There was a time in which a high-ranking official with AIPAC named Stephen Rosen was speaking with Jeffrey Goldberg, who's a journalist who's very sympathetic, served in the Israeli army and is effectively part of that public discourse that promotes Israel in the United States. And during a conversation between the both of them that Jeffrey Goldberg was reporting on, they were sitting at a table, and Stephen Rosen pointed to a napkin on the table and lifted it up and said, "Do you see this napkin? Within 24 hours, I can get the signatures of 70 senators on this napkin." And I think it was really something to really pay attention to, is that he didn't say that I can get 70 members of Congress to sign a pro-Israel bill within a day. He said this napkin, effectively bragging about the fact that they could get members of Congress to sign anything so long as they're the ones who are pushing it. But that fear barrier, that sense that no matter what AIPAC tells you is what you have to do, was thoroughly undermined in recent years with the election of somebody like Jamal Bowman, who defeated Eliot Engel, who was one of the most powerful pro-Israel members of Congress, the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee, and really an advocate of all kinds of horrible foreign policies beyond just Israel and Palestine. We saw it with the election of people like Marie Newman and Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar and Cori Bush. And we see it with the fact that we have now 4 sitting members of Congress who have used the A word, as Huwaida was mentioning about the importance of describing what Israel practices in Palestine as apartheid. 4 members of Congress have actually used the word apartheid, and all of them have won their re-elections. So that's a sign of a major shift in public discourse. It's a sign of a shift in Washington. It's a sign of a momentum going in the right direction. That doesn't mean, of course, that the Israel lobby can't fight back and make a comeback, as we've seen in this most recent election, but it did require them to pour massive amounts of money and to avoid the issue of Palestine and Israel entirely, because they know they can no longer win on that issue, that it is now really naked bullying and using the heavy-handed approach of just pouring tons of money into races to defeat people. So in short, today it is a fight, and it's a fight that we have to fight. We can take some comfort in the fact that momentum is shifting in our direction with how public opinion is showing young people are much more aware of what Israel is doing and supportive of Palestinian rights and more understanding of the injustice that Palestinians go through. But we should not take so much comfort that we essentially take it easy and feel like it doesn't require work, because every single day that we don't work as hard as we can and we don't bring an end to this apartheid and occupation is a day in which more Palestinians suffer and more Palestinians are killed and are denied their rights and are living under oppression. So it really does require us using all of our efforts to try to bring an end to that apartheid as soon as we can. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Omar. And I think just one of the points that you mentioned was very important, and for many of us to understand is that when Israeli lobbies, especially AIPAC, want to win races, they don't talk about Palestine. They talk about other issues. And that's something we've seen, especially this election cycle. As we're coming to an end, I think it's important to note this is our largest advocacy day ever. Over 800 people are joining us this year. And this advocacy day, in the time that AMP and now AJP Action have been hosting it, has brought members from every single state, has brought thousands of pro-Palestinian voices to the halls of power here in DC, brought them to Congress, brought them to the Senate. Before we end off, I wanted to start and see if everyone could just give some words of motivation or any notes that you have for our advocates before they begin speaking with their elected officials, and we could start with Ava.
Sure. Well, I think that everyone has kind of said this in different ways, that there's sort of a dam breaking moment. And obviously, like the arc of history is never like definitely going to go in one direction or another. But I think that we can take a lot of heart from what we're seeing happening, both sort of in the next generation of American Jews, of like really well organized Palestinian rights movement, and also of just like the broader U.S. electorate, and also what we're seeing in the mainstream, and the polarization that we're really seeing against AIPAC and against people who don't believe in rights for all. So I'm hoping that momentum we can take onto the Hill, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ava. Huwaida.
I don't know if this is exactly what you asked for, but while Omar was talking, one of the things that came to mind is like one of the most powerful or well-received message from my campaign was that how we needed to get big money out of politics. When we're talking about AIPAC, that's how they, sway elections, right? They pour in a lot of money, not to talk about Israel and Palestine, but to run ads on television that talk and skew a person's reputation in other ways because they can't win on Israel-Palestine. So getting big money out of politics, obviously we know, unfortunately, there's still many members of Congress are beholden to that. But that's breaking. People are sick and tired of it. And we should hope, I think that maybe we can even convey, meeting with our member of Congress, that the principle of justice and of standing up for people's human rights and actually doing the work that's behind your rhetoric. You talk about freedom, democracy, and human rights, yet you won't co-sponsor a bill that talks about not giving US tax dollars to imprison and torture children. Like, what kind of excuse do you have for that if it's not the corrupting influence of money in politics? And so I would just, I brought that up to Americans every single door I knocked on. Even sometimes when I knocked on Republican doors, if they didn't agree with me with anything else, it was the corrupting influence of money in politics and how that's stealing our voices, and it's getting our representatives not to represent us. We need them to represent us, and what we stand for is freedom, human rights, and democracy. So act on it.
Thank you, Huwaida. Omar.
Sure. Really powerfully said, honestly, by both Eva and Huwaida. The only thing I would say is to appreciate the extent to which every voice matters, because our adversaries are very, very, very powerful, and it will take every last effort of ours to bring an end to the injustice that we're witnessing in Palestine right now. And there's a question that when you are at this critical time in which we are witnessing this turning point, this watershed moment, you really have the option of either being a spectator in this moment or being part of what brings this injustice down. And I think looking back at this, I'm sure that we would all feel prouder telling our children and future generations that we were part of the change that really shifted discourse and shifted policy in a very, very meaningful way. And so to that end, I would say talk to your members of Congress with conviction. You have a just cause. And yeah, it's simply the policy currently is indefensible and the case against it is really powerful. So just go and make it with all the conviction that you have, and hopefully we can see that policy change.
Thank you to all our panelists. To end off, I want to thank you, everyone who has joined us today. As important as a reminder as possible, it's important to understand that the work for justice needs people who will continuously go out and do that work. And that is what we here at AJP Action are trying to do. Thank you all for joining us here today. Our next session will be beginning at 2:30 p.m. Please tune in. Thank you all very much, and good luck with all your meetings.